series. Joining us today is Sergio Alcubilla. Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon.
So you can't see, but you could probably hear. Sergio has some supporters here in the room, and that's great, wearing their orange T-shirts. Civil Beat, as you may know, is a local nonprofit news site dedicated to providing local investigative news across the state, and you can find all of our reporting at civilbeat.org. And if you're looking for more resources for this year's elections, check out our elections guide, civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. Thank you very much to our event partner, Chaminade University, for supporting the Know Your Candidate series and hosting us. We are in the lovely Clarence T.C. Ching conference room here at Chaminade. We won't be taking any audience questions today, but I got a bunch of questions for you. And if, without further ado, I thought we'd just say, Sergio, tell us a little bit about your background. What do we need to know about you as you vie for the 1st Congressional District?
Thanks, Chad. Just a little bit about myself. I was born in the Philippines. I immigrated to this country when I was 7 years old. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a military officer. When I was 6 years old, he was gunned down a few blocks away from our home. My mom was working in the U.S. at the time as a nurse, and she was pregnant with my youngest brother. So that's one of those things that I still remember. Just that whole experience. This was during the time of the People Power Revolution in the Philippines. And
Marcos and Aquino.
Yep, just the political turmoil. It was in February of 1986. So it was that time when just the whole country was being turned upside down. And besides our country, the Philippines just going through that upheaval. Our own personal family was going through that upheaval as well. So my mom decided to come back, and after she buried my dad, she took me with her to the United States and left the rest of my siblings behind. So for a few years, it was just my mom and myself. And
was that here in Hawaii?
No, so actually she was working as a nurse in Newark, New Jersey. So that was my first experience of America. Was Newark, New Jersey. But what was great was, I know it sounds cliche, but I remember visiting the Statue of Liberty as a kid, and I hope one of these days I can take my children there as well. But eventually, my mom saved enough money to bring the rest of my siblings over. So there's 3 boys and 3 girls in our family. Some of them are here, and my mom, she really did a lot to raise us, and I give her a lot of credit. But along the way, there were a lot of people that helped us. My aunt, took me in for a few years, and that was where I could learn how to speak English. They really instilled the value of education for me. And I think that experience it's what motivated me for my career in public service. I've been with the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii for the last 10 years.
You're an attorney?
Yes, I worked as a staff attorney, but I was also the director of external relations for Legal Aid. So a lot of my projects was focused on expanding access to justice in the community.
Tell us a little bit about Legal Aid Society of Hawaii for those who don't know about it.
So Legal Aid is a nonprofit public interest law firm. Their focus is really helping the most vulnerable in our community with civil legal needs. So that includes housing, family law issues, issues around consumer protections, some immigration. So some of the stories that you hear and some of the clients that we meet, some of them are really the ones living paycheck to paycheck. That just from one crisis, right, all of a sudden they can find themselves on the streets. But that's really, I appreciate all the staff that works in that office and all they do, because sometimes they're standing up against some of these bigger giants, and they're always fighting for the little person.
Folks that can afford $400 or more an hour, and the idea here is to help people who just don't have the resources to take on these fundamental things. Housing is a big deal. I did just want to touch on the tragedy of your father. It really is a remarkable story. I wonder if you have anything to say, because if you do get into the U.S. House, foreign policy is an issue that will come before the House. And you must have a reaction to Ferdinand Marcos' son, now president, and Duterte's daughter, the vice president. Could you just comment on that for a moment?
Yeah, especially here in Hawaii, where Filipino Americans comprise almost 25% of the population, and nationally they're 4 million strong. right? But we've never had representation at the federal level, from a first-generation Filipino-American immigrant. But every year, I'm always hopeful for our country, or always hopeful for the Philippines. I still consider the Philippines my birth country, right? And I've seen poverty in the Philippines. I've seen, really what happens when policies and politics, is destroying people's lives, right? So, those things are the images that impact me. I'm grateful that we live in such a country where we have so much opportunity here. I'm grateful that we live in a country where we have so much freedom. And, I just ask people, don't take it for granted. Remember, exercise your right to vote, be involved in your politics, be involved in your government, and be involved in your community. But I'm hopeful, for this next administration, that the Philippines can actually start to progress and that people's lives can actually get better. The Philippine diaspora it's so wide. So many people left the Philippines for better opportunities abroad, right? And we're always hopeful that life can get better for the people there.
Thanks for sharing that. Sergio and I first met over the phone. I think it might have been email and then phone, and I think I might have been the first reporter to actually say, "Hey, there's a guy running against Ed Case,"
Yeah.
and I don't remember what the headline was, but something to the effect of Case as a challenger from the left. I think that's the way we characterized it. And we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's where I, first of all, had to make sure I pronounced your name correctly. Alcubilla, correct?
That's right.
And I've been trying to, we even put it phonetically in the article to make sure people got it right, because it's, I think, very important to get names right.
Yeah.
But take us back. I know you and I talked about this, but I wonder if you might share for our audience, where were you when you had that epiphany? Okay, I'm going to run for the first congressional district, never having served in office before.
Well, I'm a board member for the Hawaii Workers Center. And during the pandemic, we were helping people apply for unemployment insurance, trying to get through the unemployment insurance system. And just that sense of frustration, people calling, saying, I'm calling hundreds of times a day, I can't get through the system, right? And, people calling through, trying to get help at legal aid, and no one was helping them. So through the Hawaii Workers Center, we held a rally at the Capitol to defend and respect Hawaii's workers. During the pandemic, we had a lot of our essential workers basically out there stocking grocery shelves, making sure the gas stations were open, making sure these essential services were open. But who was standing up for them? So we held a rally at the Capitol, and I still remember this moment. And I had looked up, and it seemed like the staff, at the time the Capitol was closed. It was only open for lobbyists. Or maybe,
could you go in the rotunda, or
yeah, right,
so that part was open,
that
but
was
you couldn't
open.
Go into any of the offices.
Yeah, you couldn't visit your legislators. And just that sense of frustration, us, just me looking up and just seeing, these people looking down at us, just wondering, why are all these workers here? Why are they here making all this fuss? But, I remind myself all the time that that Capitol, it belongs to the lady to the janitor that's cleaning the bathroom just as much as the speaker, Speaker Psyche. So I think that's the epiphany that really hit me, like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna stand up for our working community. I'm gonna stand up for workers. And I said, hey, I'm gonna run for office. But I actually had a mentor that said, hey, why don't you think about running for Congress?
Because I was going to say, why not go for a state house or a state Senate seat or even city council? But no, you went for the gold.
Yeah, because I think people are suffering. I mean, I spent a semester at our legislature, at our ledge, volunteering for an office, and I could just see sometimes the gridlock that happens there. Things that things you wish would happen quicker. Sometimes it dies in committee, right? So my thought was, why not take some of these issues to the federal level when we couldn't even pass an increase in our minimum wage? This was in 2020, when everyone thought that our minimum wage was going to go up. Right, and it didn't happen. And I was like, why not take that fight to the federal level? And I just feel like we need more everyday people that understand what people are going through, whether it's city council or whether it's Congress. We need those type of people in these positions that know what the majority of us are going through, what it means when you're working 2 or 3 jobs, and you barely get home, and you barely have enough time to spend with your family, because those things impacts the decisions and the policies that come out of those houses, that comes out of those buildings. And that's why, when they asked me, hey, why don't you think about running for Congress? I thought of my community. I thought of all the people that I've spoken with, all the people that have helped, and I said, you know what, it's worth it. And here we are, 8 months later, 9 months later.
You mentioned a mentor. Who was that?
So Dr. Amy Agbayani,
Oh, sure.
she was the first one that had reached out to me and said, why don't you think about running for Congress? And she was a big mentor for me when I was the president of the Filipino Student Association at Richardson. And I just really thought about our community, how even though we're 25% of the population, we've never had a representative from Hawaii, it's a Filipino ancestry, represent us in Congress. And even now, at the national level, we just don't have that type of representation.
Okay. Dr. Amy, if you're watching, she's someone I've known for a very long time. The first congressional district, CD1 as we call it, is really greater urban Oahu, really from Hawaii Kai through town, out west, stops somewhere around there. I haven't looked at the latest boundaries. Yeah. But as we say, it's everything but the neighbor islands as well as the windward side, the North Shore. Huge district, a lot of issues going around. What do you hear from folks when you're walking the district, when you're sign waving? What are people telling you is on their mind, particularly when it comes to Congress?
It's about the working class. It's about our workers here. And, I worked a second job in addition to legal aid. I was working in the women's shoes department at Macy's.
But I'm sorry, did you say you were working in the women's shoe department?
Yes.
Macy's Ala Moana?
Macy's Waikiki, because they're open until 11.
Well, that's something I didn't know about you.
But, I have some really great stories, Chad.
We probably don't want to talk about shoes today, but thanks for sharing that.
I do want to share one story. I remember selling to a legislator. She was shopping at Macy's. She's from the nearby islands. I sold her a shoe, and then the next day I went to go work at the Capitol because that's where I was volunteering. And then I recognized the shoe I sold her, and I said, "Hey, remember me? I sold you the shoe last night." But
did she remember you?
She remembered. But
how were the shoes?
It was great. Good shoes. Anyways, it's a hidden talent, so now I still recognize women's shoes, and I say, "Yeah, I know that brand." But anyways, it's a great skill to have. But just going back to your question, it's just the issue of affordability. So many people are just kind of giving up. They're tired of working 2 or 3 jobs. When you hear a teacher saying, after my classes, I go work as a waiter at a restaurant, and I've been doing that for years. And my gosh, and I just think about it, I'm just like, that is incredible. I mean, it's crazy, right? That we have teachers and we have a lot of so many people in the community that are having to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to survive here. So whether it's all the way in Eva or even people as far out as Hawaii Kai, I mean, they know just really how hard it is to continue to live here in Hawaii. They know really the challenges of how expensive it is to make it here. Whether you're a young couple trying to buy a home and you get outbid by out-of-state investors, or you're working 2 or 3 jobs and just trying to get by. I mean, those are the type of things that people are facing. And those are the type of issues that I'm fighting for and standing up for.
You mentioned Eva, so I think that is the boundary for CD1 out west. Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't it also go up to Mililani and Wahiwa? Is that right?
No, so it stops at Mililani, and actually the new boundaries, it stops at Kapolei.
After reapportionment, it stops at Kapolei.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. In your campaigning, I've seen your family, and I believe you have young children. Is that right?
So I have a 8-year-old son, and I have a 10-year-old daughter, Aina and Sergio the fourth.
Are you Sergio the third?
I am Sergio the third. So I'm glad we were able to continue that.
Oh, that's great.
That legacy. But they both go to public school, and I'm very involved with their PTA. And just yesterday was the first day of school. So a lot of parents, I'm sure traffic was a little bit heavier, but yeah, and they come with me. They come with me when I go door to door. We go sign waving, and I hope they're seeing this experience of why it's important to be more involved in the community, why it's important to listen to the issues that people are facing. I believe it's really a civics education for them.
The reason I ask is and I brought this up with Jill Takuda, who's a mother of 2 teenage boys, I think, and she's running for CD2 against Pat Bronco. Ed Case, your primary opponent, has grown children. Kai Kahele, who, as we all know, is stepping down from CD2. He'll serve out his term, but he's running for governor. And he made a point of saying publicly on January the 6th, he and his family were there in D.C. And he saw what happened. And then he just decided then and there, after talking with his wife, we're going home. I got to be back in Hilo. This just isn't the place for a young family. And I wondered if I could just ask you about that, because we are going to get into where this is heading, which is the extreme partisanship that's in DC. But have you thought about that? If you do manage to win this and you are elected to the House, how your family will deal with that?
Yeah, so I prepared my family. I've spoken with my wife, and I want to thank her. She's a nurse.
What's her name?
Her name is Hiromi. So she actually is an immigrant from Japan as well. So we come from an immigrant household. But I've spoken to her, and I've discussed with her about, what if we do have to move? What are we going to do with the children?
It's also, it ain't cheap. I mean, it's expensive here, but
that's
DC.
right. So, but we have had that discussion about what we're going to do moving forward. But I told her we got to win first.
Yeah, that's true.
But I do want to thank her because this opportunity to run for office is really a privilege. So I want to thank her for keeping the house together, and really she's been the one working to keep the family together.
One of the things that has been used to describe you, including by journalists like myself, and as I said earlier, from the left, as opposed to Ed Case. Ed, by his own admission, the congressman is a moderate Democrat, a blue dog Democrat, is less concerned about political ideology than about solutions. But is that fair for us to characterize you as coming from the left? Is that a mischaracterization of who you are and your positions?
I stand for progressive values because they're the ones that I believe would have the most impact in helping working families and helping local families.
So then give me an example. What would be one or two key progressive values that you stand for?
For one, affordable childcare. All right. I mean, even in our own family, there was no way that my wife and I could have afforded, paying for childcare or for daycare unless we qualified for some sort of government
Right.
help. That's something I think that could definitely help a lot of people here in Hawaii. What about free community college for everyone? I mean, these are not extreme ideas. I think when people say progressive values, they're trying to pigeonhole kind of this concept of what can we do to help more people. But if we look back at our nation's history, if we look at FDR, we look at the New Deal. Right. I mean, those things that people were fighting for back then, and that now that we take for granted. We think of the history of our labor unions, how they fought for safety on the workplace, how they fought for paid holidays, how they fought for time off. At the time, those were considered progressive, radical ideas, but now we just take it as something that we're grateful for. But so I hope that we can get to that point when we talk about Medicare for all, when we talk about healthcare as a human right, when we talk about affordable childcare, paid parental leave, that they're not such extreme ideas, but they're ideas that at the end of the day, they're going to help people. And that's what I'm really pushing for. I mean, at the end of the day, government and public service and politics should be about helping people.
To do that, you're going to have to get not only people in your party to go along with that, but the people in the other party, the Republicans, who may well control the House and Senate. We don't know. The numbers are starting to change right now. But let's face it, this is the same House Republicans that wanted to overthrow Obamacare. And it would have happened in the Senate, except for a few Republicans like John McCain stood up and said that's not going to happen. I haven't heard much talk about a preschool, affordable childcare as being a big issue. Even the minimum wage is a struggle. Things are starting to change, but how are you going to work, especially if you're in the minority, if you get elected, with people that have been so obstinate about these issues that are really polar opposite from where you're coming from?
And I believe this is the issue with our politics today, right? It's become so polarized where I think people have lost sight of what public service and government is supposed to be about. I had mentioned that I feel like our politics has lost its conscience. Right? When we had Representative Patsy Mink standing up and saying, you know what, we need to stand up for working people. We need to stand up for these issues that are going to help families. We need to stand up for equality, and she was able to push for Title IX. When we have people like Representative John Lewis saying it's important that we protect civil rights, but I believe that sense of conscience is missing in our politics, where now people are doing it for their own self-interest, and I think that's where that polarization is coming from. I am grateful for people like Senator John McCain, who stood up and said, no, this is the right thing to do. We may differ in how we approach things or what we believe in policies, but this is the right thing to do. And I think that's what's missing. And I think that racism and sexism is tearing this country apart. And when I get to Congress, I want to make sure that people remember what they're really in Congress for, and that's to
to help move this country forward. I still believe in the goodness of America. As an immigrant to this country, I believe the goodness of America and what we stand for is something that we need to continue pushing forward.
But what happens if you encounter someone like a new Speaker of the House, like Kevin McCarthy, whose idea of the goodness of America may not be yours? You did mention John Lewis and Patsy Mink. This is from your website. You mentioned pay-to-play structure and the corporate lobbying and so forth. But again, you're having to deal with someone who really comes at issues very differently. So how do you strike a balance? How do you say, hi, I'm Sergio. I'm Representative Alcubilla from Hawaii, and I'd like to talk to you about, healthcare and so forth, or protecting Social Security, something that was out of the Roosevelt administration, or Medicare for All, which I believe is Medicare from LBJ. Help me out, guys. You guys look smart. People are nodding their heads saying the 1960s, the Great Society. How are you going to do that? What skills do you have to do that?
I'm going to be one of 435.
It's true.
Right? I know it's a tall task.
I mean, you think it's tough with the legislature,
That's
right? There's 76 people there, but and it's 535 if you think about the Senate too.
That's right.
So yeah.
I mean, I understand it's a tall task, and I'm not going in there with a sense of naivete, but I feel like, my style is always collaborative. I feel like if we work together towards finding common solutions to these common problems, I think that's the way we approach it. But of course, I have my principles and my values that I'm always going to stand up for. But some of the rhetoric that I'm hearing now in Washington, some of those things we've got to stand up for. When you're hearing what's going on from the January 6 hearings, those are things that we need to stand up for.
What is your take on those hearings?
It's an affront to our democracy.
The attack that happened.
Yeah, and I understand legislators are there to bring in money back to their home state. Yes, I feel like that's Congress 101. But you've also got to provide a voice for your community. You've also got to be, provide a voice for our democratic ideals and institutions. And that's something I think that's missing. But when I'm hearing that and I'm just seeing how close we were to actually losing our democracy, I think people are not taking that seriously enough.
What should happen to former President Trump and some of the people that were involved in the Stop the Steal, which is a lie? The election was not stolen. That's been demonstrated even by people within the Republican Party. But what do you think should happen to them? Because again, if the House falls, they're already publicly talking about investigating the January 6th committee. Yeah. I realize the Department of Justice may be looking into this now, but what do you feel should be done in terms of justice regarding what happened that day?
I think hold people accountable, whether it's your city council member or it's President Trump. You've got to hold people accountable. And I think as voters, you've got to be aware of what's going on, whether you hold them accountable with your vote or you continue to press your elected leaders to make sure that no one is above the law. And I hope that the evidence does come out, or that we do have the evidence to basically hold them accountable, and whatever the Department of Justice comes out with. I think we are in perilous times, because I'm concerned that a lot of his supporters may not feel the same way.
There's talk that a prosecution of the former president, could really tear the country apart.
And this is where my experience in the Philippines and just seeing, the people power revolution, seeing people in the streets protesting for their democracy, protesting for their rights, right, standing up for these issues. That does play a role in my mindset of how close we are to losing really the vision of what America can be. I know we've got a lot of issues. We've got a lot of issues that we've got to work with, but I still believe that this country and its vision of what we can do in the world is something that we need to continue to fight for.
Build Back Better. You spent much of the early part of your campaign making a strong case that Joe Biden's plan really was essential, and of course it didn't quite come to fruition. There's some changes now. Joe Manchin appears to be agreeing to, we'll see how it goes, see what Kirsten Sinema of Arizona has to do. A lot is moving, but there seems to be some movement to try and resurrect this thing. But you were critical of Representative Case, who took a different approach on BBB, expressed some concerns. He was part of a group that said, and I'm not going to try and lay out all his position, but he basically has felt that ultimately he was in support of the president's agenda when it came to climate change and infrastructure and other issues, energy. Do you think that maybe he went a little overboard on attacking Ed Case on the BBB?
I don't have anything against Representative Case personally. I really don't know him that well. I've maybe had one chance to speak to him.
Have you met him?
I have. So he was actually a guest at one of our Leadership Fellow Institute for the bar.
Before you ran for Congress?
Before, yeah. And anyways, I did have a chance to ask him a question, and I asked him what your plans were, and he told me, that he's never going to run for office again. So,
When was this?
this was in 2000. Anyways, this was in 2018, and I was.
Oh, this would have been just before he got back in office.
This was just right before he filed. So I had asked him because it was great because we had a few people on that panel: Representative Case, Lieutenant Governor Doug Chin, and Mayor Kirk Caldwell. There was only 15 of us in the group, so we could ask intimate questions.
Sure.
And I had asked him, do you plan on getting back into politics one day? And he said, no, he's retired. But anyway, so it came to a surprise that he ran in that election. But again, I don't have anything negative against him, but I believe his policies and what he stands for is not representative of a lot of the working class communities that I meet, a lot of the people that are working 2 or 3 jobs. I think that's there's a disconnect there. But Build Back Better would have helped a lot of people here in Hawaii. And that's, I think, why I was so adamant for it, is because so many times, right, you know what the priorities of a society are by where it spends its money, right? So if we're telling parents that, no, we can't afford to invest in your children's education, or we can't afford to invest in the future, or we can't afford to invest in a green planet, but we can afford to spend trillions of dollars on this, right? And I think that's why I was so adamant about it, because I know the stories that people, I've heard and I've seen enough. I've seen so many bad in this world that I feel like that thing could have definitely helped so many people if it would have passed. And that's why I was so adamant against it.
Yeah, $1.9 trillion, and what's being proposed now is scaled back considerably, but still would be landmark. And I said infrastructure. We all know that there was a major infrastructure bill that passed with, amazingly, some Republican support. Even Republicans who didn't support it have gone back to the districts and said, hey, I'm bringing that new money in for the bridge and everything.
Because it's common sense, but
that's the kind of idea where you can say, look, we both have some similar interest here, including taking care of the folks back home.
But let me just add this, though. At the very last day, we were still rallying in front of Representative Case's office, asking him to vote yes on it, because we weren't sure how he was going to vote, right? And I feel like we don't have to beg our legislators to do the right thing. We don't have to beg them to support local families here that are struggling. And that's one of those things.
He did ultimately support.
He did, but
the bill that came out of the House didn't make it out of the
But
Senate.
let me say this: it provided cover for people like Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin to eventually vote against it when it got to the Senate. I feel like the damage was done when he pushed back against it enough, and the Blue Dog Caucus pushed back against it enough, where it weakened its momentum going forward. And that was one of the largest investments in people on the planet that we could have had.
Neither the two of you have not met as opponents, and there is no debate that's scheduled. But if there was, what's one big question that you would ask Ed Case if you had a chance to sit side by side like we are?
Yeah. That's a great question.
You have to pick just one. Well, you can pick 2, but
and I'd like to ask him, who do you stand for? Who do you represent? When a lot of your money is coming from corporate PAC money, whereas I believe we need to take money out of politics. I think that's one of those things. Whether it's Representative Case or our city council member or people in the Senate, ask them, hey, who are you fighting for, and who do you represent? Are you fighting for the common everyday man and family that's on the street working 2 or 3 jobs, or are you fighting for the CEO's pay that's continuing to skyrocket? And that's one of those things I'd love to
The fact that he takes that money, and I've looked at his filings, just like all the members of Congress, including Kaikahele, who right now is not taking PAC money as he runs for governor, but still has been receiving quite a lot from his congressional. He's still in Congress right now. Would you ask Ed Case to send that money back? Is that what you would do? If you get in, you're going to say, I'm not going to take your money, defense contractor, whoever that might be.
Yeah, I'd ask him, can you make a pledge not to take that money moving forward?
What if it's a union?
The unions, and let me just share this story. When I was a law student, I had a chance to sit inside district court. We had a pro se client trying to represent himself.
Pro se means?
I'm sorry, unrepresented, a self-represented client trying to represent himself in front of the judge. And of course, there was a high-priced attorney on the other side. And I'm watching there, I'm just like, there's no way this guy has a chance. He's going to get steamrolled over, right? And that's the way I look at our politics now. Everyday people don't have that chance when you're fighting against lobbyists from some of these large corporations. So my support for unions is because that's the only way we can come together and have collective power to actually stand up for the interests of workers. Whether it's HSTA, the teachers union, or whether it's
they're backing you. Is that right?
yes, and I'm very supportive of their endorsement and President Osa and really what he's doing, because at the end of the day, we're fighting for local families.
Well, one of the arguments that's been made locally, and we're going to shift gears right after this, is that there are many people that feel that the unions have way too much control here in Hawaii. I'm not saying that's my position, but you've heard it from quite a few Republicans, and certainly that's the case for a lot of Republicans in Congress. Do the unions like HSTA have too much power in this state?
Gosh, if they did, we would be living in a perfect state, right? When we could barely pass minimum wage from $10.10 an hour
to 18 now,
to 18 now,
but
at least
not for a couple more years.
Yes.
Too.
If we lived in a perfect world, but the reality is, right, when our hotel workers are struggling to get a fair contract, when hotel workers are having to march on the streets so that they can get their jobs back. I don't know where the power is, but this is the only way that we can have collective power as workers. It's just for us to come together, and that's why unions are important, because it's if you look at the history, Hawaii's plantation history, that's the only way we were able to move forward.
So if the pipe fitters pack decides to give you some money, you're gonna take that.
I'm sorry, I don't know too much about them.
Okay. I was just
as long
using
as
them as an example. I guess I could have brought up Be Change now in PRP, which is tied to the carpenters union. But tell you what, I'm going to save you that one. Let's move on to another issue. But I am hearing that you would be receptive, because there's a lot of union PACs that operate nationally and locally that give generously to Democrats.
But I do want to say this: it has to be aligned with my values and principles. I just don't take the money just for the sake of taking money. It has to be aligned with the principles and values that I'm fighting for.
Got it. Speaker of House Nancy Pelosi, as we speak, is in Taiwan, unless her plane is left within the last half an hour. This is a big deal. China is not happy about this. The Biden administration and the Department of Defense said, rather it didn't happen, but there she is. Very dramatic situation right now. Touch on that a little bit. If you go into Congress and the House stays with Democrats, she'll be your leader. What do you think about the speaker being in Taiwan right now?
I know that's top of mind for a lot of people, especially here in Hawaii, where we're right in the middle of the Pacific, and we're right at really at the front lines when it comes to what's going on with China. I do hope that there can be a diplomatic solution to that. As someone in Congress, sending people off to war, sending our military off to more battles is something that it's a responsibility that I don't take lightly. For someone that grew up without a father because he was in the military, right. That's something that weighs heavily on me when you're just sending people in harm's way. So I hope there can be a diplomatic solution to what's going on in China. I do want to say that the Jones Act, and I know we can probably talk about this later, Chad, but I believe that is a national security issue, and that's not the time. This is not the time to be attacking the Jones Act, because our strength in the seas and the oceans, I think it plays an important role in what's going to happen with China and kind of the Pacific realm. One of the things I do want to give credit to Representative Case for is he had passed, he had pushed for a bill basically to invest in a lot of the island nations in the Pacific. I think that's where the influence of some of the like China, where they're investing in their infrastructure or trying to gain
a foothold in
the Pacific. Yeah. I think that's something that we could do better, and I'm glad we're moving in that direction. But I hope that's something that doesn't happen, because I think of my children. That's going to be a battle that they may have to fight years from now.
The Jones Act is the maritime law that dates to over a century ago, and it's a little complicated, but essentially it's supported by unions, it's supported by Democrats, and their argument is that it provides jobs, it takes care of people here in Hawaii. It has to do with who's allowed to ship here to Hawaii. But the counter argument, and Ed Case has actually been one of the people to make this argument, is that's a major reason why our cost of living is so high, because we import so many of our goods. Certainly we import energy, and that because of the limitations placed on American flag ships coming in, that's not allowing competition that could bring down prices. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, the Jones Act, I feel, is one of those things that the Grassroots Institute and the Cato
They want to get rid of it.
Yeah, they've been pushing for that. So we've got to remember where that information is coming from. But I feel like the misinformation that they've been providing to the public, saying that this is the reason for our high cost of living, I feel like it's a disservice to the community. And, I feel like people are just trying to find something to blame of why it's so expensive to live here in Hawaii. And I feel like the Jones Act is really not that boogeyman that people make it out to be.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, the reason I support it is because it supports our workers. It supports our national defense. I mean, just making sure that we have a steady flow of goods between Hawaii and a U.S. port on the West Coast. I mean, those are things that I think we've got to remember why it's important that we keep that. And, I just think of really what the motivation is for trying to get rid of it, right? Because I'm one of those that I had to look at both sides. I had to look at, studies from both sides of the argument, right? But the motivation behind it, if it's a business motivation where, companies are saying that, we can get rid of it so that it's cheaper for them, right? Cheaper for them to do business. At the end of the day, I don't know if they're going to pass those savings on to the consumer. Right, I think of our manufacturing industry, some of these towns in the Midwest, right? When in the 90s, people said, oh yeah, let's move all the jobs to China because it's going to be cheaper to produce there. And a lot of these towns became ghost towns. And what happened to us here now, 20, 30 years later, we can barely produce some of the things that we needed during the pandemic because we outsourced a lot of those jobs. And, with the Jones Act, I think now is not the time to outsource our maritime industry, our shipping industry, to foreign countries that may not have our best interests.
Well, give me one thing that you could do if you got into Congress to bring down the cost of living, because that is something that everybody agrees here is the number one problem. It's housing, it's food, it's fuel. It goes into every element of our survival here. What's something you could convince Congress to help Hawaii to bring that cost of living down?
Well, let's go back to some of the points on Build Back Better, right? I mean, affordable childcare. That's one of those things that, just speaking with parents, right, when the spouse has to decide whether or not they're going to go back to work, and they realize, if I go back to work, whatever I'm making is just enough to pay childcare.
I mean, it's a lot of money, isn't it?
Right. So, those are the things. Let's push for that. Let's make it affordable, more affordable for families, not just here in Hawaii, but nationally.
Okay. There's a poll out from Harvard, CAPS, and Harris. The midterm elections are shaping up. This has caught me by surprise to be a close call. This is from The Hill today. As Republicans, or yesterday, campaign on high inflation and a probable recession, this is where the Republicans feel that they have an inroad, while Democrats seek to go on the offense over the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, and of course, the climate change legislation. I suppose we could bring up gun control as well. How much do you think what the Supreme Court did in the last week and a half of June, we mentioned overturning Roe versus Wade, that's not going to happen here, I don't think. The concealed carry guns that is being recognized as a Second Amendment right, gutting the EPA's ability to target carbon emissions for polluters. Even school prayer at a public institution, sure, after the game, but it's still school prayer. How much do you think is that going to resonate? Because there isn't much time to November. Are you sensing that people may use the Supreme Court's decisions as a motivator to vote Democrat?
I hope so. I feel like our nation is at a crossroads. I hope this is a way to galvanize voters to realize, I need to be involved in our politics. I need to be involved, whether it's the local level or at the national level. I need to be involved in our government. And that's my message here too, as well as just to a lot of our local residents. Don't just wait until election time to vote, or don't just vote blankly, but hold your legislators accountable, hold your elected leaders accountable. And I do hope that these issues, it's a way to galvanize people to realize, like, I need my voice to be heard. I do want to make sure that I do have a say in this democracy, because again, and I've said it before, our democracy and our politics just doesn't have to belong to the rich and to the powerful. It should belong to everyday people, everyday working people like you and me.
You may be asked to vote on this, to codify it. The House is already moving. Even the Senate is starting to move to say, we need to take care of this at federal law, whether it's abortion rights or gun rights or EPA and so forth. There's even talk that same-sex marriage, which is the law of the land, and same-sex relationships and even contraception might be changed as well. So if you're in Congress and there's a vote that comes up to vote on these issues, where do you stand on gun control, like an assault ban, which is being proposed once again by the House? How do you feel about it? You think assault weapons should be banned?
Oh my gosh, I mean, military-style weapons on our streets, I mean, those are guns of war. Um, you know what? One of my greatest fear when I drop off my kids in school, of course, is just hearing in the news of another mass shooting. Gosh, I mean, why do our children have to pay the price for our constitutional right to bear arms? I mean, we need some sort of common sense legislation on gun control. I mean, yeah, we don't need these type of, and this goes back to money in politics, right? If the NRA is able to influence a lot of our legislators with all their money and their power, who's going to stand up for the parents? Who's going to stand up for saying no? We need to do something else because we can't have another mass shooting in this country. It's just, I mean, it angers me, right? That I think of the images of these parents and our children like the same age as my own children having to pay the price because of people want to carry these type of guns in public, and that's upsetting. And I just feel like we need to have a stronger stance. We need to stand up to the NRA. We need to stand up to the gun lobbyists and to these other corporate lobbies that are not acting in our best interest.
This is also from your website, and you've already mentioned this a bit. As an immigrant to this country, I have not lost sight of what this country can be. That despite our checkered history, we aim to do better and to do right. As a settler to these islands, I hope to bridge these histories. You are up against a former president who wanted to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico against a very big anti-immigration position on the part of the Republican Party. That's going to be and this is a state that probably has just as many immigrants as almost proportionally as maybe California and a few others. How do you do that? Because you mentioned it earlier, there's talk that white supremacy is really influencing the position of the Republican Party.
You know, I had this interesting conversation with a really good friend and mentor, actually, John Whittick. So
he's here today, by the way.
He's here somewhere. He's been making good trouble for a long time. But he shared with me that he marched in Selma with Dr. Martin Luther King, right? And here we are, 50 years later, he fought for civil rights. And despite that challenge, right, during that time of the racism and the hatred that, I spent some time in the South.
Whereabouts?
So I grew up in a small town in Florida, right?
Panhandle or?
No, it's Central Florida, small town, Leesburg, Florida. Really small town, but it was still divided by the railroad tracks. So on one side, of course, you had your more well-to-do community, and on the other side, you had a lot of your working class community. So I had to navigate both worlds. But my point is, when I think of really John's history, fighting for civil rights, to where we are now 50 years later, and we're still fighting for these same things, right? The work, I feel like the work is never done. We're always fighting the good fight. So, if you can take up that mantle and continue to fight the good fight, whether you're a legal aid attorney getting paid peanuts to represent people, or you're someone in Congress as a senator.
It pays pretty well, by the way, 174 grand last I checked. So.
Well, that's better than
you don't have to go and sell shoes anymore.
Oh, that's right. But I mean, that is an issue, right? People that want to do good.
Well, I've been asking you about immigration because I don't want to go too much into this route, but I'm sure you've heard of replacement theory and some of these QAnon folks. And there are people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others who are members of Congress, who are Republicans. I think she's from Georgia, not Florida, who, by the way, who does not want to check her weapon and is going to walk through that metal detector that's at the house. As an immigrant, how does that make you feel to know that there's so many people in this country, a good many, that really don't want, I'll just say it this way, non-white people coming to the U.S.?
And let's go back to just ideas. I think you're playing on people's fears, right? And whether you're President Donald Trump or some of these other dictators, you're parlaying people's fears into some of these things for your own. You're exploiting these for your own advantage. But instead of exploiting people's fears, I want to appeal to people's goodness. I grew up in the 80s where it was clear watching cartoons, there was a good guy and there was a bad guy. And I always wanted to side with the good guy. I don't ever think I met someone that said, hey, I want to be part of the bad guys, because they don't win at the end of the 30-minute cartoon, right? But I do want to say that at the end of the day, I think there's goodness in people. And that's something that I aspire to continue to push people for. It's just that there's the goodness in America, there's goodness in people all around. And we've got to stop using politics and fear because I feel like people are just simply exploiting it for their own purposes.
I admire that, and I wonder how long you'll be able to keep that optimism. It was Anne Frank who said, "At the end of the day, I ultimately believe that everybody, generally is good at heart." And of course, we know what happened to her. Let's move on to some other issues. I feel the same way, by the way.
Thank you.
And that's
Thanks,
what
Chad.
keeps me going. And I've been to Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam. Quite a thing to see. President Biden is the oldest U.S. president in office. There is already talk within the Democratic Party that he should not be the nominee in 2024. Where do you view this issue regarding your president?
I support President Biden's policies in terms of what he's trying to do. He's trying to transform really this country through the Democratic Party by asking us to think about what are we investing our money in. I want to continue to support really his policies and what he's been pushing for, whether it's Build Back Better or trying to find ways now to lower or to fight inflation. I think it's a disservice when people from the Democratic Party are attacking him because it weakens us as a whole, right? And this is the time for us to be united. This is the time for us to really come together and really stand up to some of this racism and sexism that's coming from the far right.
He is a senior citizen. He just had a relapse with COVID, and we all wish him absolutely the best. But there is talk about whether he has the stamina to serve another 4 years. Is there anybody else in the party that you're looking at as possible backups?
I don't really think too much of that. I don't have time to be thinking.
I do.
I know you do it for a living, Chad.
Well, I do. I worried about Ronald Reagan,
Yeah.
who at the time was the oldest elected president as well.
Yeah.
And that seems, and of course, there were concerns about his mental acumen.
Yeah.
He ended up having, was it either Alzheimer's or dementia? Alzheimer's, and a very,
That's
his
right.
wife Nancy had to take care of him. And so this is the most, at least last I checked, the most powerful person in the world. And you must have some concerns about that.
I'll leave that to the political insiders.
You might be one of those.
My focus is just what can we do to help people? What can we do to help
I give up.
families? But I'll leave it to you, Chad, to speculate and to think about that. I don't have enough bandwidth, I think, to think about that.
That's all right. Let's get back to you. We talked about this before. I'm going to go ahead and read this. This is from the Q&A that you did with Civil Beat, and thank you for doing that. It's time we transition to providing universal health care for all by passing the Medicare for All Act. I believe Bernie Sanders supports that, which would guarantee health care to everyone as a human right, because here's what it would do. It would provide you with primary care, vision, dental, prescription drugs, mental health, long-term services, reproductive health care, no more copays, private insurance premiums or deductibles. That's very ambitious and certainly appealing to a lot of people. How are you going to pay for that?
When President Biden said that there's a way to pay Build Back Better by really, fixing our tax code so that our corporate structures, they pay their fair share, or when our super wealthy pay their fair share, that's what I'm looking at. People ask you, you come up with these good ideas and they say, how are you going to pay for that? Right? But we don't ask those type of questions in some of the other industries, right? When we look at how much we're spending in terms of defense, defense industries. But
that's something that Democrats and Republicans agree on, right? Give all the money defense needs.
Yeah, why do we continue to write a blank check for those type of things for war and destruction? But when it comes to providing universal health care for people, we've got to say, how are you going to pay for that? I had an interesting demonstration for the pie of wealth here in America. Right.
We wouldn't let you display.
I know.
I apologize.
But it was just so interesting just to see that 90% of our wealth is just where the wealth distribution in this country, how it's so skewed for the super wealthy and for the super rich, and for that, for us that we're fighting for crumbs, right? So when people say, "How are you going to pay for that?" My gosh, it's so disconnected from what the majority of us are facing. When those are the things that we need to have, because during the pandemic, when a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of their healthcare also went with it, right? But just for that to be something that has to be tied to employment, there's got to be a better way. When we're I think we're the only industrialized country left in the world that doesn't have universal healthcare.
This bill that's being proposed by Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin with the acquiescence of the administration would, in fact, tax soak the rich is another way to put it. The criticism of that, of course, and you're already seeing Mitch McConnell say that's not going to happen. But they're saying those are the very corporations that create jobs and keep this economy going. You can't take away. I can't even take that question seriously myself.
Go ahead, Chad. Wait, I'll help you finish. No.
Oh boy, if only we could edit this out. But we're live. That's how we do it
Yeah.
at Civil Beat. But if I do want to get on record, you're saying we do need to tax more corporations and the wealthiest Americans in order to help all of us, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I mean, that's just that wealth, the inequity kind of in our economic system, and whether it's political, economic, or even religious, right? Just the exploitation and that sense of greed, I think, is what's really, something that we need to speak out against. But I think of some of the moments in my life, whether it was the recession in 2008, the housing bust, the bubble,
Yeah.
right? And how that great.
But we ended up bailing out the firms in New York City on Wall Street, right? After all this happened, the same people that were involved in the collapse.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, because this is
The
where
banks.
the greed comes in, right? And I think that's something that we need to speak out against. But people have been harping trickle-down economics for a long time.
Ronald Reagan.
That's right. And I've come. I mean, we know that it doesn't work, right? But it goes back to, when a lot of these corporate lobbyists are giving thousands amounts of money to legislators, it's hard for them to make that choice and to stand up for people that aren't giving them boatloads of money. And when I go back to my campaign and I think of the people that are donating, people on limited income, people on Social Security that are giving me $20, $10, I mean, that means so much to me because, and that's why when I'm in Congress, I'm not gonna take any corporate PAC money. I'm not gonna, because at the end of the day, government has to be for the people.
Okay. We're within our last 10 minutes. I
can't believe that went so fast, Chad.
I know. We could easily go another hour, but I got Ed coming in, and believe me, I got to clear the time for Ed because he's going to have a lot to say as well, Congressman Case. But this has been terrific. I do have to ask you, what have you learned in these? Is it 8 months now that you've been running?
Yeah, probably since September.
So what was the big, wow, I didn't think it was going to be like this. I can't, if only I had known before I got in. But really, what have you learned from this campaign that you didn't know before going in?
Well, I mean, for one, it's a lot of work, right? We're sign waving 6 a.m. until, and then you do it again.
Hey, at least you're on Oahu, right? You don't have to fly to all the neighbor islands.
Yeah, but, and there's some days when you're struggling. I mean, of course, we don't have the thousands of money, hundreds of thousands of money as some of the other campaigns. Ours has been really grassroots and people-powered and people-centered. But I think one of my biggest takeaway from it is just people are worth fighting for. That when you stand up for what's right, you stand up for everyday people, and you stand up for what's good in this world, I think it's worth it. And that's what motivates me to wake up every morning and go do it. Because otherwise, people that run for office are the ones that can afford to. And it's been a sacrifice, of course, but it's one of those things that I'm grateful for. That.
How's your week and a half ahead looking? Because the primary is August 13th. What's your plans?
We just keep going. We keep, knocking on doors, keep talking to people. And I think it's really, people telling people telling their friends, hey, check out this guy. He's the real deal. He just doesn't just talk the talk, but he's actually walk the walk. And I think that's really how you win. At the end of the day, you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on fancy commercials, but that word of mouth, I think, is what gets the message out. And the reception has been really great. I do have to say that. So I thank everyone for really all their support.
2 final questions for you. If you don't make it to Congress in 2022, sworn in January, what's next for you?
Gosh, I've got to ask my wife first for that. That's the right answer because. It's of course, running for office, it's hard, especially if you've got a young family. But I feel like a part of me is just getting started. We're getting the message out. We're resonating with people that, we don't need to have more wealthy millionaires representing us, whether it's in city council or in the Senate, because they're not acting in our best interests. I've been serving the person for a long time in my work at Legal Aid, but now I'd like to serve the people. And I think my heart is always going back to whether it's helping one person, make life better for them, or whether it's helping an entire community. But whatever that looks like, I just feel like we're getting started.
And there's remaining minutes here, and I do have some closing remarks that I need to make, but what didn't we get to? I'm sure we could easily talk much longer, but what is on your mind that you feel that you need to stress right now, an issue that didn't come up during our discussion?
I was thinking about that this morning, actually, when I was sign waving in Hawaii Kai, and, people would beep and wave and smile and shaka, and it goes back to the sense of goodness, right? That I think at the end of the day, people want to do, I believe people want to do good in this world. And I think of, and I look in the cars and I see people taking their kids to school, and, people just struggling, just trying to live their life, right? But I think my main point is just, there's so much more that we could do better. I know that things look bleak right now, that there's so many issues that we're fighting with, whether it's Roe v. Wade or whether it's,
You support abortion rights.
I do. I support a woman's right to choose. I support making sure that we separate church and state. But I think for me, at the end of the day, it's just, it goes back to my immigrant roots, and there's really this vision of America as this beacon of hope, in this world. That I'm grateful for the chance to be able to grow up here, live here, and especially for my children to be able to live and grow up here in Hawaii. But, what can we do to make this world better? Whether, you're a janitor at the Capitol, or whether you're, at the speaker's position, is what can we do every single day to make this world better? And I want to take that into politics. I want to think that sense of hope and optimism into politics, because that's what's missing.
Have you ever seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington?
People tell me about that all the time.
It's before my time, but I've actually seen it, and you are familiar with the story. Jimmy Stewart, of course, I think he's in the Senate and he filibusters. No filibuster in the House, but
that's right.
So people have been bringing that up when they hear about you.
Yeah, there was actually another. Yeah, people have mentioned that, but there's also another movie in the '70s. I think it's called The Candidate with Robert Redford.
Yes, that one I definitely know well.
Okay, I may not be as good looking as Robert Redford, but I'll go with Jimmy Stewart anytime. But I think at the end of the day, that's what keeps us going, right? If you're just so pessimistic and you just think of all the bad things and just give up, then what's the point? Right? I feel like this vision of America, it's something that we need to keep progressing forward. And some of the politics that I'm seeing now is pushing us back 50 years.
Okay. Thank you, Sergio Alcubilla.
Thank you, Chad.
For today's discussion. And thank you to our audience, as well as back there, for joining us for this Know Your Candidate event series. Thank you as well, especially to our event partner, Chaminade University, and supporting the series and hosting us right in this amazing room with one of the best views in all of Honolulu, if you ask me, the Clarence T.C. Ching Conference Room. Check out our elections guide at civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. And thank you to our supporters and everyone who joined us live here today at Chaminade.